The Moton Mailbag is brought to you by the Robert Russo Moton Museum, located in Farmville, Virginia. The Moton Museum is a civil rights museum focusing on the history of Prince Edward County between 1951 and 1964.
I'm Kanan, and this is the Moton Mailbag, Season 2, Episode 6.
I'm Irene.
And I'm Leah. Alright guys, are you ready for our Thanksgiving question for this mailbag? What is your favorite Thanksgiving food?
Easy. Mac and cheese.
There's a
Just
hierarchy of mac and cheese.
There's
I've had the deep dish mac and cheese like last week. Mac and cheese is not a Thanksgiving
It is a
food, I'm
Thanksgiving
sorry.
food. It's a Thanksgiving side.
For me,
if
it's
you
a
will.
gathering food, which Thanksgiving's a family gathering. So we have
Yeah.
mac and cheese.
It's a Thanksgiving side.
Yes, technically you
And a
can't.
side is a food.
You can't eat turkey. Like you can eat turkey. Like I could poke a hole in like turkey, which is the obvious answer. But like, you know, the holidays associated with turkey.
Do you
not
only eat
with mac and
turkey
cheese.
at Thanksgiving or during the holidays?
Yeah.
Really?
Only Thanksgiving, Christmas.
Okay, so that makes sense to me that
Well, first I don't know how to cook it, so
it is a whole
the only
feast.
time it's getting cooked.
Quite
is
literally.
by
Yeah.
Because it's a bird.
my mother,
It used to be.
my grandmother.
Yeah, so like Air Family sporadically will have just dry bird. I'm like, why is this happening? But you guys, for me, my favorite Thanksgiving food definitely is sweet potatoes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, could be candied yams, which is not the right. I mean, they're not yams, but here we are anyway. That's how we refer to them. Sweet potato pie, always good. Yeah, it's a good go-to.
But like fall foods are Thanksgiving foods, basically.
Yeah.
Like stuff that's associated with fall, like sweet potatoes and squash and gourds
Squash.
and all that
Mm-hmm.
stuff, turkey and just brown leaves and stuff. It's the fall season in June.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like weird, not quite comfort food, but just like associated with like family gathering ish. Yeah.
Southern comfort.
Yeah.
Curious what Thanksgiving looks like in like, because some people have what did I hear? It's like spaghetti or something. Like it's like some if you go up like west and like Midwest and like north, like there's like really
Spaghetti
interesting.
for Thanksgiving.
It might have not been spaghetti. It was something that there was just like, huh? How does that end up on Thanksgiving? But yeah, if you go
Well,
another,
regional differences, yeah, that.
Could do a nice turkey chili if you lived in Texas.
turkey chili.
But I feel like that's Black Friday food, not Thanksgiving
Oh.
food. Yeah, the day after we
you take the leftovers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's like, well, we got this, we gotta eat it. So what are we gonna do?
Well, turkey's too dry to remix a lot. Like, there's not a lot you can do. Like, you do the sandwich, but that's because you got like mayo or whatever on it.
Yeah.
Do
You could-
soup.
gravy. I mean, you
Soup.
Could, yeah, you soup. You just
Turkey noodle soup.
Just dip it in the
So
broth.
Yeah.
But like, you can't really do a lot with the turkey. Have you ever had fried turkey?
No.
There was an attempt. We thought about it, but then Mom was like, "You'll set the house on fire." You're not wrong.
That's dangerous.
So many houses were burned.
It's dangerous.
I've been told it was good. I just have never.
I mean, I feel like it'd be good.
Like
it'd be bad
Bojangles.
for
Well,
them.
I mean, I guess technically that logic checks out, but it doesn't mean I'm still not curious.
Because I wonder how the seasonings would be impacted by said frying.
Well, that said, don't think there's going to be any more seamless of a transition into talking about protest.
All right.
Well, let's get into it then.
All right, I guess I'm asking question number 1, which today is, and Leah, correct me if I might have miswrote this, but how do you successfully plan a protest?
Yep, that's the question. All right, so my answer was, well, first of all, you go through the proper protocols to do what you need done. So you check all the boxes of you contact your representatives, you say this is the issue we have, and once like nothing happens, that's when the civil disobedience, the protests show up. And then it's a case of where if you're having a protest, you contact the town or the county that you're in to ask what the protocol is to do that. So you're following all the rules, all the rhetoric, so nobody can say, well, you just showed up and did X, Y, and Z. Like, no, we have permits to do these things.
The paper trail.
Exactly, that's your paper trail, because you're permitted to protest, kind of part of your rights, to say, like, this is an issue we have, to bring awareness to it. So follow the process, see what happens.
Yeah, and I think like going along with deciding that you want to plan a protest. I think you really have to be careful about deciding which issues are a top priority. Because once you start protesting about A and then you protest about B and C and D and E and F and G, and people look at you and say, oh, well, they just protest about everything. They don't like anything and they're just complaining. You have to be really strategic about what you want to protest for and what you want to accomplish, because if you just protest for everything, then you won't get anything done.
And then, going off of that, knowing your community and who is impacted by the issues that you are protesting.
Yeah.
Having that their voice is part of it.
Yeah.
It's one thing to just say, I'm going to do this by yourself. You do all the protocols, but you didn't ask anybody.
To get any
That's
input, yeah. Like with
directly
the Black Lives
impacted,
Matter protests this summer.
Yeah, it's like, how are you protesting because you want to just be loud? Are you protesting because you have a purpose and you want to amplify the voices of those who are impacted? Like, what's your method and your motive?
Yeah.
I think Black Lives Matter is a good example of that. I mean, if you look back 3 or 4 years ago, I think people's main issue would be that if you could ask 5 people what Black Lives Matter meant, you would get 5 different answers. I certainly think that messaging has certainly changed since then, or at least streamlined. To which kind of more concise, direct answers can be given. However, but yeah, I think years ago, kind of, it was just kind of, people didn't get it, but like you saw kind of out, after kind of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, like the businesses and everybody who was tweeting and using the hashtag and really trying to say they support Black Lives, and some backing it up, but saying that they support Black Lives and that Black Lives Matter, kind of how far the organization had come and how important messaging is to the to the cause, equally to the protest itself, if not more important.
And like it's not that comparable, but also comparable. If I just think about the Green Book and how it was used, like this is the guide for African Americans or Black Americans. Don't go to these go to these places where you're going to be safe when you're traveling. So if it's a business and they say they believe Black Lives Matter, but they're not doing anything, or they're not hiring appropriately, or they're not protecting those they have hired, then their actions speak louder than their words. So why would you're not getting my money? That that kind of thing from the economic aspect of it.
Yeah, protest is just kind of a topic that, of course, is divisive, but it's peacefully assembles in the First Amendment, right? Like, let's just throw that out there. It's a right that people who live in this country have. So kind of my train of thinking was, first you need a cause, and I specifically said a cause because it's similar to what Irene was saying. Like, too many irons in the fire. Like, focus on one thing, but your agenda can evolve as your platform evolves and as the issues evolve, right? And that's more than okay. That's why the NAACP is still around, but they're fighting for it's okay to also have an umbrella cause, right? That may have other ideas that impact that. Like, and I think that's kind of what the evolution of BLM has kind of been over the years. So find your cause, but anybody who's faint of heart really should stop at this point, because this protest is intense, and it's scary and it's real. It's not easy to plan an effective protest. Many protests are planned months and months, if not a year or so in advance, with significant timing. It's also important you realize, like, protest is essentially, in case of emergency, break glass, right? So what Leo was saying earlier, like, protest should never be a first resort. It's always a last resort. You only go to protest after you've exhausted all of your available resources. You contacted your legislators, you contacted the city, the town council, board of supervisors, whoever, right? Because you do all that because you checked all those boxes, and protesting is the last resort, and protests should be the last resort because protests have consequence.
Absolutely.
And I think, of course, there's the super obvious examples like Martin Luther King Jr. and the attention that brought to him, and Barbara Johns having to leave, her county and her family home to go live somewhere else for her own safety. But you become a target, like, whether you want to, whether you mean to or not, like, by publicly demonstrating, you are becoming a target to everybody who does not support you, because you are endorsing something, and that means that you are going against what somebody else thinks or what somebody else believes, which is going to put you at some risk. Now, some of that's going to be overt, some of that's going to be covert, but either way, you're exposing yourself to that, so that's why it's really kind of a desperation measure. Like, listen, nobody's listening to us, nothing's changing. We have to protest, otherwise nobody's going to listen to us. That's the purpose of it. So just be mindful that if you're going to do that like, these are the risks that come with it, and it's not for the faint of heart. It's not for everybody. And also, if you can't protest or you don't want to protest, that's okay.
Yes.
Like, everybody doesn't have to be, in the diners, sitting, doing the sit-ins, right? In the 60s protests in Prince Edward County, there were, younger kids. Obviously, they don't want younger kids being potentially attacked by police officers or counter-protesters or whatever, right? Like, so they stayed in the church and they wrote the signs. And they made the lunches for the actual people who were out there picketing. For the older, students who were protesting, if you didn't want to be involved, hey, you got a car, you can run transportation. Like, there are other ways you can be involved in a protest in kind of civil disobedience without necessarily being out there on the front lines. And your contribution can be just as important.
And sort of thinking about, alternative ways to protest without, being on the front line, holding up a sign, marching, sort of like what Leah said, choosing to only patron businesses that support the causes that you believe in and who actively show that they support those causes, and sort of cutting communication with people who don't support those causes that you believe in, friends, or you hate to see it, but sometimes even family members, if they are blatantly just disrespecting you as a human being, then you can protest by not talking to those people. There are a lot of different ways to protest.
Great.
Yeah, and because I remember with all the protests that happened this year, like, all right, I should go. Then the next time, all right, what's your plan for when I don't have a plan? So sit back down.
Especially with COVID.
Yeah.
And, everything.
Because you always want to plan ahead. There's going to be consequences, but you don't know what they are until it happens. So just be mindful. All right.
On to the next one?
Yeah. Second question. How do we get our schools to teach this history? This history, we think, refers to Moton or civil rights.
How do we?
Yes.
Sometimes how did we? Okay. So, but my question still applies because it's going to be we haven't.
Oh, it is how did we? Either way.
Okay.
That happened.
Well,
carry on.
It hasn't happened enough yet. So here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and by it I mean the Moton School story history kind of broadly, even if it's just Barbara John's or student strike or just talk about school closes a little bit. Currently, Virginia Studies, U.S. history in the middle school level, which is either 7th or 8th grade, depending on where you're at, and then U.S. history, Virginia and U.S. history at the high school level, which is typically 11th grade. Now, outside of the Commonwealth of Virginia, most people don't even know Farmville, Prince Edward County. I mean, it might could tell you the capital, but probably of the state, but like not usually, right? So we have to work a lot harder in those areas. Now, I will put an asterisk next to like Topeka, Kansas, Wilmington, Delaware, Washington D.C., and Clarendon, South Carolina, because those also had cases that were the Brown decision. So they probably talk a little bit more about it than other areas, but. The amount of people whose jaws hit the floor when we tell them the story it's incredible. And even me growing up here, like I didn't grow up learning about this stuff.
Exactly.
I only really had a gateway into it because my dad was a product of the school's closing. But I didn't know that his aunts, my great aunts, and his grandfather were plaintiffs in Brown v. Board. Like I didn't learn that until I was in college. So like learning about this here, like it's kind of looking through a window of like why don't anybody else know this? Like I keep giving this example, but like we had the 50th. Anniversary of the class of 1967 for Longwood a couple of years ago, 2017, and they were here when Kennedy was here, and when Martin Luther King was here, some of them, and when the free schools opened, when all this stuff, Supreme Court cases, and they had no idea. This is the first time most of them had heard it coming out of my mouth, a person who was a lot younger than them. And they were like, all this happened while I was right down the road. It's like, yeah, but but it was intentional that you didn't find out, though. So I hope you don't feel terrible because like the powers that be were making sure you didn't know because they didn't want you to be involved. But like this is a lot of people, and even to this day, there's a lot of folks who don't know. I have found in the past probably 10, 15 years, it's gotten better in terms of kind of K-12 here, but it's going to be a while before we can get. Well, that's not answering the question. You said, how can we? You said, how can we?
What's the method?
Not is it?
Yeah.
I guess a big part is, and a lot of this was, as when people have taken more interest in Black history, civil rights history, African American, diverse stories. This comes up. The key is advocacy, right? I think in your department meetings, it's bringing in folks, shameless plug, but bringing in folks from the Moton Museum, seeing us do a decent job, and then they're like, oh, I didn't know this. I'm like, well, now you do, so either bring us back or let's do some professional development, to increase your curriculum knowledge, advocate at the state level. Here in Virginia, we only got Barbara John's and Moton School Story added to the SOLs because of our advocacy efforts. And because the platform kind of for this history has increased. Find allies, find allies. We've got allies all over the state who are very strong supporters of our institution and really invested in teaching this history and creating kind of projects to get that message across. So advocacy is the one word answer to that would be, but there are a lot of different ways. And you've got our email address info@motonmuseum.org. If you want more resources, you can gladly reach out to us. But yeah, that's my answer in a nutshell. What do y'all think?
I would say, coming from a school that, the only time that we learned about this was in AP Gov when we were talking about the Brown cases, and it was like, oh yeah, one of the 5 cases happened to be here, Davis versus Prince Edward County, and then we moved on. And then we talked about the product of Brown, desegregation, working towards integration, and then we just sort of moved on down the line of civil rights. We didn't talk about the history that was quite literally 5 minutes away from our school.
Right.
And I think a lot of it comes from just the willingness to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because it can be an uncomfortable story. It's a lot to unpack. And I understand that for a lot of the families that I went to school with, they maybe weren't on the right side of history, sort of looking back on it. But looking at it now, in today's perspective, it already happened. What can we do to move forward and make sure it doesn't happen again? How we can start working to be better. It's going to be uncomfortable for a lot of people, and we just have to get used to that. We have to say, I am comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And it's easier said than done, by all means, but it comes from that first step of just saying, I'm gonna reach out.
I didn't want to hop on the soapbox, but here it is. Here I am again. I can't stop myself from stepping up here. Just the notions of being comfortable. I'm just like, some people just never get that.
Yeah.
Like,
the privilege of being comfortable.
History.
Not once.
All history. We learn about the American Revolution.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? If you ask a British person, it probably didn't go to, even most Americans probably, it probably wasn't a fun, pleasant experience. The French and Indian War, guess what? If you ask the French, if you ask the Indians, I'm sure you're going to get some bad stories in there. How about, 1619 to 1865? I'm sure there's a large group of people who did not have a good experience during any of that time period, just about, right? So like this notion of like hard history. All history is hard. Like
And
Great Depression, like if you were middle class in Great Depression, yeah, like you might have had a financial drop off, but what if you were already broke? Like then you have even less. Like it's just like all history is hard. So we just have to deal with it head on. Like, and just, I would say this is till I'm red in the face. Like the notion that you can't criticize something and still have value for it. We can criticize actions, we can criticize stances, we can criticize, but it doesn't mean I don't want to be here. I'm trying to hold the nation accountable to its ideals, so let me do that, right? I don't hate it. It's just I want you to say all men are created equal. I want you to mean it. All men are created equal, mankind, all people, right? We the people, who are we, right? Respect your neighbors, all that stuff. Just notion of hard history is always just all history is hard. You're just not talking, you're just not telling the whole story if it's easy.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, to piggyback off that holistic history, that's a lot of people that you need to discuss and talk about. So incorporating the Moton story and the Virginia SOLs as a start. We're building an online website portal for primary sources and lesson plans. It's a start. So it's look, we see the gap, we're gonna bridge the gap, and then once you know better, you do better.
Right.
So once you have this history, you sit with it and you deal with it, because that's part of being an American.
Right.
Black History Month, it's only 1 month, but Black history is throughout the American story. That is the American story.
Holistic.
So you need to having people prioritize a holistic American history, not a hoorah, not real. Fake, imaginary, we're always the best. Yeah, romantic version.
Yeah.
Versus the reality of what the U.S.
The good and the bad.
Yeah.
It's all mixed into one. And it's, one thing I always try to remind myself, it's a privilege to learn about something instead of having to experience it.
Right.
So take that privilege and do something useful with it. Learn about it and do better with it.
It's like history responsibly.
Doing
history responsibly.
History responsibly.
Look at that.
Yeah, I'm not stepping back up, so I'm gonna let this one peter out.
All right, well, I think I have the next question. So, are there any folks who lived the history who are still alive?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kanan, you briefly touched on it. Your parents being a product.
Yeah, my dad will be 68 next year, and he was kind of on the younger end of the spectrum of those who were locked out of school. So he was going to start the first grade. The older end of those who were locked out of schools is probably about 78, give or take. So that's been those who are going through their senior year when school's closed. And then the student strikers, in the young end, 82 probably is the youngest, 81 maybe, and then the eldest, and he left high school to do like some military service and then came back. But he'll be about 90, maybe even 91 this year. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of them, and I think that really just goes to show how recent this history is, right? I think when young people especially, they just have, bless their hearts, they have no concept for age, they have no concept for any of that stuff, and it's the funniest experience. Work with Mr. Bob Hamlin in particular, one of our best docent we have here at the museum, and then this kid comes up and asks, how old are you? And then Mr. Hamlin's like, how old do you think I am? He's like, 50. And Mr. Hamlin's like, thank you. And then I'm like, well, how old am I? He's like, 45. I'm like, oh, okay, well, for only 5 years apart. Like, all right, like, I guess I'm not doing too well. Mr. Hamlin's doing great. But yeah, it just goes to show really, how recent this history is. Like, we've only had desegregated schools in Virginia for 61 years, which is not a long time. I'm sure many of our parents and all of our grandparents, if we still have those, their lifespans, right? 61 years, that's not a very long time. But yeah, this history is fresh, and and luckily for us, we get to walk side by side with these folks, and they're some of our biggest supporters here at the museum.
Like, as a historian, it's really weird to be active with like living people telling their story, like being engaged with living history. It's like, okay, I can just call you up and you can tell me what I need to know, because versus me hunting in an archive for a document, I just call Miss Joan or Miss Joy, like, okay, I have a question. The accessibility is amazing. It's just like, oh, okay.
Like other museums, like, oh yeah, the descendants, and you're like, what do y'all do with your descendants? I'm like, nothing. we still have
We get the originals.
Their ancestors. I guess we deal with the ancestors. Is that what we say? Yeah, that's what people say, right? Like,
Yeah, sure.
we deal with the people, like,
But-
interact with the people rather.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's their history.
Exactly.
They're still here. This question wasn't planned, but I want to bring it up anyway. How do you deal with the comfortability of asking these people to sort of relive the trauma of the history that they experienced?
Oh yeah. Always you ask, are they willing to share? They say no. All right, thank you. That's it. And end of the conversation.
Yeah, my probably a little bit different just because I'm here and like I can like for me it's like, oh yeah, Townsend's Maharon, like you went to school with I know a lot of these people went to school with my great aunts or knew my great grandfather or know my dad. Like he was locked out of school with them, so like there's that immediate like street cred, for lack of a better way to put it. And so like for me it's just like instantly walls are guards are down, and then I'm with this multi layers, right?
Yeah.
So like we're at the museum, one layer goes down. From here, one layer goes down. Those my people, there's the third wall down, right? Like, and not to say that they can't be dropped in other ways. Leah does a really good job at disarming because she's very authentic and genuine, and that you have to go in with that and humble, right? Because if they're not, if they feel like you're trying to come to Prince Edward or do whatever and make money or make clout off of the back of their name and their trauma, they're going to smell that out from a mile away. So it's really just about that humility and that grace and understanding that this is traumatic, and to be, very thankful of them for being willing to share that trauma with you. But at the same time, too, the ones who don't want to talk about it ain't, right? Like, and there's most of the people who experience this, they're never going to talk about it. We've got a solid group of people who are talking about it constantly, and honestly, the first couple of times, from my perspective, hearing from them, it's difficult, right? And occasionally they still might get teary-eyed, but at this point, people have gotten so comfortable talking about it, who talk about it, they can pretty much do it like that, which is such an awesome resource for students, especially these History Day projects that we get 5, 6, 7, 8 requests for per year. They're like, do you know any of the strikers? I'm like, yeah, I got 5, 6, 7 of them. You take your pick, right? Like it's just awesome. Like you can talk to the sister of Barbara Johns, who was there, who protested with them, who walked out of this building, who's a plaintiff in Brown versus Board of Education, right? Like you could talk to Reverend J. Samuel Williams, who was here for the strike, a senior, left to go to college, came back, mentored this next generation of students who were protesting. Like that's just not something you can experience in a lot of places, and it's just an amazing and a very humbling experience to be able to work here and side by side with these folks and continue to tell and preserve this story.
Yeah, you're just like sitting, like, God, that is a lot we do. But then it's like, it's a lot that people are willing to share with us, to share with students. It reinforces the importance of the telling the story and having it incorporated in schools, so they're not surprised. Yeah.
Well, like as a side, like, we're going down the rabbit hole. We're going down. So like,
we're committed.
you know, I really try to help these students to understand that you are asking an 82-year-old woman or man to recall events from a day which happened over almost 70 years ago when they were 12 years old. Like, so I need you to think critically about the types of questions that you're asking, because just asking them what happened that day is something that you could Google. Like, you could look that up. You could ask me that. I could tell you that. You come here and watch the strike film. That'll tell you what happened. You need to come up with a little bit more creative ways to engage these individuals who've heard these questions time and time again. And I don't blame the interviewers, because they have no reason to know that, right? To them, they're the first person who's ever interviewed this person. But
they're still
like, they're humans. They're three-dimensional beings. Their life did not just happen that one day. They did other things. So ask follow-up questions, you know, some probing questions potentially, but if they're comfortable with answering those type of questions. You know, what type of music did you listen to back then? And what was the fashion? And you mentioned going to church. What was that like back during this time? What's the difference between going to church then and going to church now? You know, just critically thinking about it, because if, you know, just asking what happened that day. Oh, well, Barbara stood on stage, she banged her, you know, shoe like a gavel, and we walked out. Okay, good interview. Like, you could find that out anywhere. Like, these are humans, and it's really and I've tried to be better about that too, and just working with them. There's ways I can get different answers out of them just from knowing them as well as we do. But trying to get people to be like, look, like, this is one day, 70 years ago, they were 12. Like, I cannot remember what I ate for dinner last night. Like, we need to think a little bit more expansive about the nature of these questions. Yeah, we all have to pause and think.
Like, what did I have?
Do I remember? Like, like, it's hard. Like, memory is one of the least reliable sources of. I mean, anyways, that's my other kind of, not soapbox. That's more like
that's just a good interview technique.
Smaller than soapbox.
Cause
A washcloth box.
A soap stool.
A soap stool. That's good.
Your soap
That's
stool.
good.
Yeah. Alliteration.
That's good.
Thank you.
That's my soap stool. It's not a box claim, but you know, I really want three-dimensional human beings who experience a whole life outside of. They've had a whole career. They've likely had whole families. Where, what did you do on this one day at this one time when you were 12?
And then just for more context about what their experience was as a student. Typically, students are asking these questions. They're like, "Well, I like music too. What did you like?" Like, being able to have a conversation about it, and then it's always like when it's, "I like that artist too. Wait a minute," and it's like the intergenerational.
Well, and how did it shape your life? Like, did you get involved in NAACP, or were you involved in any other? Oh, prime example: 65th anniversary of Brown v. Board last summer. Yes, 2019. I was 65, right? Yes, 65, because it's 61 years since school segregation. So we had a panel, and it was very specifically designed, like a legacy panel. So we had individuals who locked out of schools and their children. And the question was asked to the panelists, the locked out folks. It was, how do you think that being locked out of schools impacted the way you parented your kids? And it was just like, whoa, right? Like that. Yeah. Powerful question. Because I know for me, and I use the example a lot, and I'll say it again, but like my dad, he made me go to summer school every year, even though I never failed a grade. I was going to point out, they're like, dang, Kane. I'm like, no, I didn't fail. It was mandatory for me. And then I aged out of voluntary summer school, he created homework for me to do every summer. And I'm just like, why? But looking back, it made so much sense. But that's not something that, you know, 4th grade year old Sally would know to just ask, or probably should ask, right? At least not intentionally to build some rapport. But like those type of questions that actually make folks think, like those, those are the best. And the responses, oh man. I've got the video I can show y'all later. But it was powerful moment on stage in real time. Yeah.
Because like that's a question I would think you have to sit with for like 4 minutes. Just like, all right, where do I start?
Oh, and we had to sit in that. Like back to that comfortability piece. Yeah. Like you can't escape. Like this ain't no Zoom. You can't mute the video. We were sitting in the audience in real time watching a grown man. 3 times over grown man, probably almost 80, break down into tears and apologize to his son for the way that it was, oh my God, like, and that might be too strong of an example. I don't want to encourage our listeners to think of questions like that, but that's the type of question that's like, this is a question that these people have probably never been asked. They probably have never made that connection. Like, and Miss Mosley was on that panel too with her son, and it was, and I was moderating, like almost crying. I was like, I'm okay, I'm good. I'm good. Like I was just like, sweating. Don't look at me, look at them. I'm not the focus. Like it was, it was emotional. But you have to sit in that, like that discomfort.
Yeah.
Oh, but that's an experience I'll never forget.
Yeah.
That panel because of that question. Right?
Yeah.
That's just.
I just derailed the pod, but it's that powerful, and I can share it in the description of this too if anybody's interested in that. It's on our YouTube page.
Yeah, I mean, it shows the humanity. Like, throughout my tours, every once in a while, I'll say, "These were children.
Yeah.
These look at these children's faces.
Right.
You know, let's keep that in mind. It wasn't just like a blanket, the black children,
Right.
like the other. Like, no, that's Joan. That's who that is. Like, pointing out her image and the photo of the Brown v. Board, the Davis plaintiffs we have in the gallery.
Well, that's why I give names. Like, I'm like, this is this person, this is Joan, she's still here, this is such and such. So that way, like, it really human. Like, it's easy just to look at numbers and dates.
Yes.
And like just think, oh, this was so long ago. This isn't that important. Like, I can tell you, and I literally said it pretty much verbatim. We're at 34 minutes, but that's okay. This might have to be a two-parter. I literally get to visual all names. I'm like, I could tell you 3,000 kids, over 3,000 kids were impacted by these schools closings, or I can show you how long it's going to take me to scroll through each and every one of these names, and just know that with every name, even if they were in the same house, had a different story. It doesn't matter. Different perspective, right? Maybe Billy was old enough for Boy Scouts, but Johnny wasn't, so Johnny had to stay home, right? So that's a different experience. Maybe somebody sent the younger kids away and kept the older kids to work. That's a different experience. Maybe, I just graduated that summer of 59, and then I have 4 younger siblings. Those are totally different experiences all around. Like, we need to humanize these stories as much as possible, because it's very easy to look back and say, oh, this happened, right? Like, and I think our friends at the Holocaust Museum, I take a lot of the insight I have on this from them, because their educator, who's a good friend of mine, is like, don't just show pictures of dead bodies, right? And it's like, all right. And then her explanation was, essentially like how dehumanizing is that to just see a pile of usually naked dead bodies in a pile? Like, these are people, right? Like, the people who had jobs, people who had lives, people who had family, like, those are people. So, like, don't show them in that capacity, because it completely and utterly dehumanizes them. And so you lose that, like, you don't feel compassion for a pile of bodies, right? You don't feel that compassion, but you do by hearing their stories and their lives. And a lot of that really resonated with me, and really kind of helped to mold how I adapted my style here at Mo.
Like, just the power of a voice, and like, I don't know. I like to say I cut my baby historian teeth on Nazi Germany, which is a lot, but also that's where it started. Yeah. And like, having basically grew up at the Virginia Holocaust Museum, like, Mom, let's go on a field trip. And like, she would take me. And then, because she's an educator as well, to have that experience. I remember Alex Liebenstein, who I love that man. When he passed away, I did not take it well. But like, there was a book signing, and he was like, oh, I remember you. I'm like, you remember me? Oh. You remember? Okay. And it was just like, all right, calm down. I need you to calm down. But yeah, it's people matters because they're people, point blank, period. And like, allowing the space to honor somebody's story is pivotal. It's vital. And that's what history really is. You study people and how it shaped everything else.
I think I've already decided that this is going to be a two-parter, so I'm already here. So let's just go ahead and
let's do it.
Let's just drop in for a second. Like, this really reminds me, like, how Leah and I both gave like Holocaust, Nazi Germany examples. Like, why is it that some history like is objectively bad? Like, when we're in school, like, I don't want to speak for y'all's experiences. Like, when I was in school, it's just like, even though we're talking about wars and stuff, like we were talking about Revolutionary War, but it didn't even sound like, they didn't sound. I guess maybe it goes back to the romanticizing it part, but like there's a Boston Massacre, only one person died, but it was great because it inspired this, that, and the other. But like, every time we talk about the Holocaust, like, it's like, oh, it was really bad, and they did really bad things. Like, I feel like some history was just like, oh yeah, maybe just because it wasn't us doing it, like, we were getting like, and then America came and saved the day. Like, maybe that's the whole point. But it's just like, why was some stuff like, oh yeah, they need them to Pinta, the Santa Maria, and other parts like, yeah, and then there's that one thing, and then we had slaves for a bit, but it's okay because we got rid of them. It's like, huh?
And I think part of it is like a Eurocentric, white-centric. This is the history that's happening to us. We're going to, I mean, let's be clear, colonization was going to go steal stuff and take it back to Europe and make money. So they're like, oh no, it's nice here, we're going to settle. And then like, I think with Holocaust history, they knew what was happening, but they hadn't decided how to help or what they were going to do to help. But then like, when the troops were on the ground in the European theater and they liberated some camps, you want to know what's really traumatic? Hearing a Jewish man share his story about how he was at Buchenwald and he took the pictures. And I'm like, okay, Mr. Allen, thank you for sharing with me. I'm just going to sit here with you. We're going to have this experience.
Right.
As he's flipping through his photos he took, he was an aviator. He passed away in February. Not a good day for me. And it's just like, and part of it is kind of the World War II glory as well. Like, have you ever heard a bad World War II story? Other than like they survived it, it was great, and they were so stoic and strong.
The movies, it's just like, why do we keep making these war movies? Like, yeah, maybe the World War I and World War II movies aren't going to be like as traumatic for younger people, but like, imagine like going through this awful thing and then like 40, 50 years later, like, how about we make a movie about, I'm just like, on one hand, like in terms of like an art form, like, yeah, maybe that could be a great window into doing it, but like, at the end of the day, like, people are doing it to make money, so like, isn't that super insensitive? Like, I wouldn't want somebody to, worst day of my life, oh, let's make a whole movie about, like, that could have been the worst day or worst week of, something I'm, PTSD or whatever about, like,
Well, and so I think, coming at this from the perspective of someone who is Jewish, who grew up learning about Jewish culture, who grew up learning about the Holocaust, I think it's really easy as an American to look at it, and I don't want to use the word objectify, but I guess to romanticize it. At the time, most Americans did not have a stake in the game. Right. There was a lot of issues of, do we even get involved?
Yeah.
And then finally Pearl Harbor was attacked, and that was awful, and so we got involved in Asia, and then we got involved in Europe, but I think now we didn't have a stake in the game, but then we finally did, and we came out as the victors, as the winners. And so here in the U.S.
we saved the day, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
We saved it because we're American, we're great on the side.
Like the American savior complex, the white savior complex. But, growing up, watching movies like The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, reading books like Elie Wiesel's Night or Number of the Stars, and even more recent movies. I'm blanking on the name. It was about a woman named Adele, and it was the gold painting of her that was in the Austrian Art Museum, and it was taken from her family during the Holocaust by the Nazis, and the Austrian government had been holding it. And so this woman Adele was the woman in the picture, and her niece wanted to have the rights to the picture back. And watching that movie, and about how this woman and her husband were able to escape Europe, but so much of the family did not escape. And other movies about how one of Hitler's primary officers fled to Argentina, and then his son fell in love with a Jewish woman, and it just became this whole debacle. And just like watching that happen, it's I remember sitting there in the theater thinking, okay, wow, and then trying to go back in my own family history and say, okay, this is when we left Eastern Europe, but what about the cousins who didn't go? What about the uncles and the aunts? And thinking, okay, well, they were still in the Ukraine, they were still in Lithuania when this happened, and odds are they didn't make it out. And it's a lot of history to sit with. But when you don't have a stake in the game, it's easy to say, oh yeah, like shooting guns, shooting Nazis, yeah, that's great. It's like, okay, well, maybe if you're not living through it.
Right. It takes us full circle back to that perspective.
Yeah.
It all depends on how you're looking at it. And we need to do a better job collectively. History, social sciences, social studies, whatever, it has to be done better. We have to know that there are different perspectives. I mean, perspectives of women, for the love of goodness. Even to this day, like glass ceilings and pay discrimination and sexual violence and violence in general, like it's just like if you write it right, the history books are run by the perspective of the winners. I mean, I think that sums it all up. Like, and if you didn't win or
depends where it's been written.
Oh, yeah,
it's a textbook.
True.
So that's why we got those primary sources, y'all.
Yeah.
Depends on what you mean by win. Depends on may have lost the battle but won the war.
Oh my gosh.
In a sense, even though the war was
Even
lost,
the war, but
Turtle. Yeah.
still won the pride.
Yeah, and that's
It's
and then you get into intersectionality, and it's
God, and
so much.
And I wonder if, like, for me, being interested in military history, but from a personal perspective, it's not the same as, like, let's learn about battles. Like, that's cool, but I don't want to waste time learning about maneuvers. Right. Who was there? Right. What did they write?
The humanity of the battle. Yeah, not battle tactics, but battle humanity.
And just like that's the thing I missed in all my history classes, even in college. Like that's the one thing. Like in college history, like I did learn like different perspectives on the history I'd learned, which really showed me more of the truth of what actually happened. Right. But I think what key was missing, like these are people. Like one day they're gonna be reading about us in textbooks, right? Like in 20, or hopefully not textbooks, because they are immediately outdated as soon as you print them, basically. But, you know, in 2070, like, they're going to be learning about us in this time period and what we were doing. Not necessarily the fact that we were humans and had lives. I go to the grocery store. I might have to go to the grocery store after work, right? And I'm going to go home and cook dinner and live my life. Like, there's more than just one event. It's more than just, you know, one war or one conflict, or, you know, more than just 9/11 or whatever. Like, we have so much else going on, and we need to realize that, because we short sell, we short change, and we really condense stuff that shouldn't really be it.
Because then, like, going off of that, a person is their whole experience. They're not a blip on the screen.
Right.
So, like, thinking about 9/11, I remember where I was, the feelings I felt, and then, like, later on 9/11, I had a cousin in DC, I had a cousin in New York, so that was a rough day. Just thinking, like, the what ifs, like, playing that up. But that was just one day, and how that, the reverberations, you know, the ripple effect. So, history is so much more.
Yeah, this is not where we're planning to go.
Yeah, I think we covered a lot of ground, though. A lot of really important ground.
Yes, it's going to be split up into 2 parts, and y'all might not know that when you download the first part or listen to the first part. But, yeah, we're at 46. So anything else from you all?
No, I think that was good.
I'm not opposed to taking one last ride. If y'all have anything else y'all want to get off the old noggin. No, but we should probably wrap up.
Getting there.
This has been season 2, episode 6 of the Mailbag. Make sure you send your questions. Email us at info@miltonmuseum.org or social media. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.